Most people hear the phrase fox mindset and immediately picture a con artist. Someone who tricks people, says one thing and means another, always working some angle you can't quite see. That's the first myth. And honestly, it might be the most damaging one on this entire list. Because here's the thing. Foxes don't survive by being deceptive. They survive by being observant, patient, precise. They don't waste energy on things that don't matter. They don't announce their next move. They don't get rattled when the environment shifts. They adapt quietly, and they move when the moment is exactly right. That's what the fox mindset actually is. And today we're breaking down 11 myths that most people still believe about this way of thinking. Myths that are quietly holding people back, without them even realizing it. Stick around for the final myth, because it's the one almost everybody gets completely wrong. And before this video ends, there's a surprise waiting for you that's going to change the way you read certain people in your life forever. Let's get into it. The fox mindset isn't about personality. It isn't about being introverted or extroverted, loud or quiet, aggressive or passive. It's a psychology of attention, of timing, of knowing what actually deserves your focus and what doesn't. These 11 myths are the reason most people never get there. Let's break them down, one by one. Myth 1. The fox mindset is about manipulation. And look, it's an understandable mistake. Foxes have been portrayed as tricksters for centuries. In folklore, in fables, in cartoons going back further than most of us can remember. So, when someone builds a whole philosophy around the fox, the automatic assumption is that it must be about outsmarting people, playing games, pulling invisible strings. But here's what that completely misses. A fox doesn't manipulate its prey. It doesn't need to. It observes, it waits, and when the timing is right, it moves with precision. That's not manipulation. That's strategy. And there's a psychological difference between those two things that matters enormously in real life. Manipulation is about controlling other people. Strategy is about controlling yourself, your attention, your timing, your response to what's happening in front of you. One requires you to manage everyone around you, which is exhausting, unpredictable, and ultimately unsustainable. The other just requires you to manage you. Think about the most composed, quietly effective person you've ever known. Were they running games on everyone around them? Or were they just exceptionally clear about what they wanted, and exceptionally patient about how they got there? That's the fox mindset. No tricks required. The takeaway is simple. Stop confusing strategic silence with dishonesty. Not every quiet move is manipulation. Sometimes it's just someone who understands that announcing every step of the process usually makes the process harder. Myth 2. Staying quiet means you have nothing to say. Let me ask you something a little uncomfortable before we get into this one. When's the last time you assumed someone was sharp because they talked a lot? There's a psychological phenomenon researchers have documented where people consistently rate fast talkers as more competent than slower ones, even when the actual content is word for word identical. We're wired to mistake fluency for intelligence. So when someone stays genuinely, deliberately quiet, the room tends to collectively decide there must not be much going on beneath the surface. But here's what's interesting about how foxes actually behave. Before a hunt, one of the most striking things to observe is how much time they spend completely still. Not because nothing's happening, because everything is happening internally. They're processing, filtering, building a picture of the situation that most other animals never bother to construct at all. The quiet isn't empty. It's loaded. I know someone who sat through an entire 2-hour business meeting without saying a single word. At the end of it, the CEO turned to her specifically and asked what she thought. Her response took less than 5 minutes. It changed the direction of the entire project. She hadn't been disengaged. She'd been collecting every piece of information that everyone else revealed without realizing it. She spoke once, and it landed harder than everything said in the previous 2 hours combined. Takeaway: if you're in a room with someone who's barely talking, don't make the mistake of writing them off. And if you're the quiet one, stop apologizing for it. Myth 3. You always need a complete plan before you move. This one is sneaky because it actually sounds like wisdom on the surface. Plan your work. Work your plan. People say it constantly. And sure, there's real truth buried in there somewhere. But the Fox mindset version of planning looks completely different from what most people mean when they use that phrase. Most people use planning as a quiet reason not to start yet. One more spreadsheet, one more research session, one more conversation with someone who's going to tell them they're not quite ready. And, psychologically, here's what's actually happening underneath that. The brain gets a small reward just from making a plan. The act of organizing your thoughts creates a feeling of progress that can actually reduce the urgency to move. So sometimes, the more detailed the plan, the less likely you are to act on it. Foxes don't plan in the abstract. They gather real-time information from what's directly in front of them and adapt to what's actually happening. The plan is always alive, always adjusting. Never so rigid that a single change in conditions breaks the whole thing. The Fox mindset isn't about winging it. It's about gathering enough real information to move, and then moving, instead of treating information gathering as a permanent substitute for movement. Myth 4. Patience means waiting. Let me say something that's going to sound backwards for a second. Most people treat patience like it's passive. Like you sit there, let time pass, and eventually the right thing drops into your lap. And yes, technically that's a version of patience. It's also a version of doing nothing and calling it strategy. The fox teaches a completely different lesson here. When a fox is stalking prey, it isn't just standing still doing nothing. It's breathing carefully, keeping its body low against the ground, reading every micro movement in front of it, adjusting its weight without triggering a single sound. Every second of what looks like stillness from the outside is active, focused, and pointed directly at real information. Active patience means staying fully engaged with what's happening while not reacting to it yet. Your attention is completely on the situation, not on your frustration about the situation. And here's the distinction worth holding on to. There's a difference between someone who's patient because they're calm and reading things carefully, and someone who's patient because they're quietly afraid of acting. The first person is gathering. The second person is hiding. They look almost identical from the outside. They are not the same thing at all. Myth 5. The fox mindset only works for introverts. Real quick, if you're getting genuine value from this, go ahead and subscribe. Every video on this channel is built from real psychology and real research, not recycled motivation. The goal is always the same. Something practical you can actually use the same day you watch it. Now, let's keep going. This myth comes up constantly, and the logic behind it makes surface-level sense. The traits most associated with the fox mindset, observation, stillness, restraint, patience, all sound like introvert superpowers. So people assume that if you're naturally outgoing, this philosophy simply isn't built for you. That's not how it works. The fox mindset isn't a personality type, it's a skill set. And introverts don't automatically have these skills just because they're naturally quiet. And extroverts don't automatically lack them just because they're naturally social. There's a guy I'm thinking of, genuinely one of the loudest, most expressive, highest energy people in any room he walks into, who somehow runs those rooms better than almost anyone I've ever watched. But here's what he does before he runs them. He shows up early. He watches who gravitates toward whom. He listens for what people are actually worried about underneath what they're saying out loud. By the time the meeting officially starts, he already knows where the real tension is sitting and what people actually need to hear. His energy is completely extroverted. His information gathering is pure fox. Those two things coexist without any contradiction whatsoever. The fox mindset doesn't ask you to change your personality. It asks you to use your attention differently. Myth 6. Noticing everything means you're overthinking. Here's an observation that most people have genuinely never stopped to examine. Overthinking isn't about how much you notice. It's about what you do with what you notice. Overthinking means you've taken real information and started spinning it, adding imaginary layers, catastrophizing, building out elaborate scenarios that have lost their connection to what's actually happening in front of you. Observational thinking does the opposite. It stays close to what's real. It doesn't wander off into worst-case territory. It just keeps collecting, patiently, and waits for a clear pattern to emerge on its own terms. When a fox is processing every sound and movement in its environment, it's doing the opposite of overthinking. It's thinking about nothing except what's actually there. Present, grounded, entirely in contact with reality as it is. not as it might be in 12 different imagined scenarios. Most people think too much about things that haven't happened yet, and not nearly enough about what's happening right now. The fox mindset is a constant pullback toward what's real and present and actually in front of you. 7. Emotional control means suppressing how you feel. This one does real damage when people get it wrong. And most people get it wrong. Suppressing emotions means pushing them down, pretending they're not there, refusing to acknowledge them while they build pressure somewhere in the background you're not looking at. The psychological research on this is consistent and uncomfortable. Suppression doesn't make emotions weaker. It makes them louder when they eventually surface, and they always surface eventually. Emotional control in the fox mindset is something completely different. It's not about hiding what you feel. It's about not letting what you feel make your decisions before your mind has had a chance to actually weigh in. There's a practical gap between feeling something and acting on it. 2 separate steps. Most people collapse them into one automatic reaction and then wonder later why the response came out wrong. Think about a fox that gets startled by a sudden sound. It doesn't freeze indefinitely, and it doesn't sprint blindly in the first available direction. It processes the actual threat level, fast, and responds in proportion to what's real, not in proportion to how startled it felt in that first half second. Feel it fully, then decide what to do with it. That sequence matters more than most people realize. Myth 8. Smart people always have the answer ready. This one is going to hit some of you harder than you're expecting. So, stay with me here. We've built this cultural image of intelligence that looks like instant recall. Someone fires a question across a conference table, and the sharp person fires back the perfect answer before anyone else has even processed what was asked. Quick, confident, immediate. The room is impressed. But some of the most genuinely sharp thinkers I've encountered share a habit that looks almost like the opposite of that. They pause. Not performatively, actually. They'll say, "Let me think about that for a second," and mean it literally. Some of them come back to a conversation an hour later, or the next morning, with a response that quietly reframes the entire question everyone was trying to answer. They weren't slow. They were being accurate, and accuracy is harder and more consistently valuable than speed. Here's the psychological reality underneath this. Quick responses feel impressive in the moment, but they pull from whatever's most immediately available in memory, which isn't always the most relevant thing. Slower responses have time to pull from more of what you actually know. The fox mindset doesn't reward the fastest reaction. It rewards the most accurate one. Myth 9. Being adaptable means you stand for nothing. People consistently conflate flexibility with inconsistency. And that confusion keeps a lot of people from developing one of the most practically useful mental skills available to them. A fox that adjusts its hunting strategy based on weather, terrain, time of day, and the specific behavior of its prey isn't being inconsistent. It's applying consistent values, efficiency, precision, conservation of energy to constantly shifting conditions. The values don't change. The method does. Those are different things. The same framework applies directly to people. You can be deeply principled and deeply adaptable simultaneously. In fact, people who are genuinely grounded in clear values tend to be more adaptable than people who aren't, because they always know what they're trying to protect. Every decision runs through the same internal filter, even when the decisions themselves look completely different on the surface. Adaptability without values is just instability with a better name. Adaptability anchored to clear values is strategy that can handle almost anything the environment throws at it. Myth 10. The fox mindset means being a lone wolf. The lone wolf image is genuinely romantic. Rugged, self-sufficient, needing absolutely no one, answerable to nothing. Hollywood loves it. It also, practically speaking, doesn't hold up very well under examination. Wolves survive in packs specifically because coordinated effort allows them to do things no individual wolf could manage alone. Foxes do hunt primarily solo, yes, but that's a hunting strategy adapted to a specific type of prey, not a philosophical statement about human relationships. A fox that ignored every piece of social information in its environment. Territorial signals, threat cues from other animals, the behavioral patterns of what it's hunting, would be a very short-lived fox. The Fox mindset uses social observation as one of its most important tools. Noticing how people interact with each other, picking up on group dynamics that most people completely miss because they're too focused on performing, to pay real attention to what's actually unfolding in the room. Solitude is sometimes useful for protecting focus. Isolation is a different thing entirely, and it isn't the goal. The goal is being genuinely present when you're around people, not performing for them, not managing their impression of you, but actually reading the room. That's the Fox mindset applied to a social environment. Moith 11. Good timing is just luck. Here it is. The one that quietly costs people the most. And the one almost everyone still believes without realizing it. Let's really sit with this for a second. When someone makes a move at exactly the right moment, asks the right question in the right meeting, launches something at the precise moment the market is ready for it, says the one thing in a difficult conversation that shifts absolutely everything, the people watching tend to say the same thing automatically. They got lucky. Right place, right time. Simple as that. That is not what happened. There's a psychological concept called situational awareness, the ability to perceive, comprehend, and project what's developing in a given environment. It's studied heavily in fields where timing is the difference between life and death: aviation, emergency medicine, military decision-making. And what researchers consistently find is that people with high situational awareness aren't reacting faster than everyone else. They're seeing the environment more completely. They notice things earlier, which means by the time most people in the room have recognized a moment is happening, the person with genuine situational awareness has been watching it build for minutes, sometimes much longer. A fox that makes a perfect hunt look completely effortless has been reading that particular patch of terrain the entire time leading up to it. The final move is fast, yes, but it's fast because everything before it was slow, deliberate, and completely focused. That's not luck. That's what sustained, disciplined attention actually looks like when it finally pays off. And it's almost impossible to explain to someone who's never practiced it. Because from the outside, it just looks like being in the right place at the right time. Here's the practical shift. Start paying closer attention earlier to the environments you're already inside every day. The opportunities you've been calling luck are usually patterns you haven't yet learned to recognize. Now, remember at the very beginning of this video when I told you there was a surprise waiting before the end? Here it is. Have you ever noticed that some people in your life seem to pick up on absolutely everything? Every shift in the room, every unspoken tension, every small detail that everyone else walked directly past. And yet, they say almost nothing about any of it. That's not shyness. It's not disinterest. And it's definitely not an accident. It's one of the most specific and underexplored psychological patterns that exists in human behavior. And it connects directly to everything in this video. The patience, the observation, the timing, the emotional control. The way real attention actually works when someone isn't spending it on being seen. If you want to understand exactly why those people stay quiet while everyone else reacts, and what's actually happening, underneath that silence, there's a video on your screen right now. It's called The Fox Mindset. Why some people notice everything but say nothing. Watch that one next. It will completely change the way you read the quietest person in every room you walk into. I'll see you there.